We explain the roots of the Cold War. By the middle of World War II, it had become clear that the tide was turning in favor of the Allies. Through a series of meetings between FDR, Churchill, and Stalin, the future plans for the post-war world began to take shape. The conference decided that the Americans and the British would invade France in 1944 and push in from the west, while the Soviets came from the east. Churchill feared that this meant the Soviets would take control of Eastern Europe. They also agreed that Germany must be divided. Churchill was right. By 1945, 11 million Soviet troops were occupying Eastern and Central Europe. Also in 1945, the Big Three met at Yalta to debate self-determination for all Europeans after the war. True to Churchill's belief, Stalin demanded a buffer of communist protectorates. Stalin argued that if the Soviets were not given control of Eastern Europe, the West would continue to invade Russia, just like they had under Napoleon and the Germans in both World War I and World War II. FDR was agreeable as Stalin held many of the chips that he needed. He needed Soviet help to defeat the Japanese, and he also needed their support for the creation of the United Nations. The United Nations would be born in April in San Francisco. They all agreed that Germany would be divided into 4 zones controlled by France, Britain, the US, and the USSR. Stalin agreed to allow free elections in Poland someday. The stage was being set for future conflict. The group would meet again in July in Allied-occupied Germany at Potsdam. Germany had surrendered in May and Hitler had committed suicide. The Japanese were in the Allied sites in the Pacific. The meeting also felt different. FDR had died shortly after the Yalta Conference, and Harry Truman was now the president. Churchill had been voted out of office during the conference and was replaced by Clement Attlee. FDR had not played a strong hand against Stalin in the previous conferences, despite Winston Churchill's misgivings about the Soviet leader. Harry Truman had much less trust of communist intentions than FDR had, and had no intention of letting Stalin dictate the terms. Perhaps in a decision to stand up to Stalin, Truman informed him of the secret atomic bomb project. Perhaps Truman thought that Stalin would be shocked by the secret Manhattan Project, which had just successfully tested a bomb in New Mexico a few weeks earlier. Maybe he thought that Stalin would hold less power over the peace process if the Russians knew that the U.S. didn't need them to help end Japan. But Stalin's lack of surprise was due to the spies he had installed in the project. Much of the Potsdam Conference was designed to make sure the same mistakes weren't repeated with Germany that they had in the Treaty of Versailles, preventing World War III. For instance, Germany would be carved up into 4 zones, and war reparations could only be taken from that zone by the power who controlled it. Germany would have their military stripped and dismantled, as well as their military industrial plants, but regular industrial plants would stand. The German people were to be allowed participation in whatever new government was formed, and Nazi leadership would be tried as war criminals. And Japan was put on notice in the Potsdam Declaration written by China, Great Britain, and the United States that they must surrender or face a new terrible weapon.